Hello there, ladies and gentlemen of the internet. This is a time-lapse video of me taking apart this Acer laptop that used to belong to my friend. And if you're interested in the insides of laptops, what it's like taking one apart, or maybe if you plan to take one apart yourself just to play around with, or maybe even to perform some of your own maintenance to clean up the thermal paste, clean up the dust, make your laptop perform better. This is a good video to watch for you to get an eye in of what it's like to take apart a laptop. So to give you some clue as to what this laptop is, this is I think it has a Sandy Bridge Core i-Series CPU in it. It's not that old, I would say 2010, 2011, probably even newer than that. It's an old Acer, and it used to belong to my friend. We've since sold it on eBay. But yeah, it's a lot of laptops from this era are designed like this, so it's a good idea to watch me take apart this laptop if you want to take apart any laptop that's made similarly. It's plastic, mostly plastic, and it's screwed together like as you can see here. I showed you the tools that I'm using. I have a good-sized Phillips head with a magnetic tip to get the screws out, and then a little flat head there off to the side, which I use for prying. And then I have the HDX tool set, the orange one that you saw me show you, that I got from a Home Depot for, I think it was $4. It was a really good deal. But that's for all the small jobs and all the auxiliary jobs, like if there's torque screws, which this laptop doesn't have any. You don't have to worry about that, but I have that just in case there's anything funky that I need to tackle. And so as you can see, I have it out now because there's these really tiny screws that hold the back of the laptop together underneath the battery. And of course, as you see, I've removed the battery initially because it's very important to do that before you rummage around in your laptop. You don't want to have power flowing through your laptop if you're going to plan on taking it apart. So now I'm prying off the cover, which covers the hard drive, the Wi-Fi card, and the RAM. And the hard drive is the one I'm taking out right now. It was kind of funky how it was held in. It was held in with 2 screws. However, it was pretty it was seated in there pretty good, so I had to sort of pry at it a little bit with some leverage. I was taking out as many screws as I could find around the hard drive just in case any were holding it in. But you'll see me eventually use the flathead to sort of try and leverage out the hard drive. I'm a bit confused, as you can see. But there we go. Yeah, you can see I'm trying to get in between the plug and the actual hard drive itself, and there the hard drive eventually comes back a little bit. It was pretty hard to get out. It was just in there really good. But as you can see, I'm plugging it in, taking it out, plugging it in, taking it out, just to show you how I was able to get it out. And a lot of hard drives are seated in there like that, but you have to remove the hard drive because the motherboard plug is, it's the way that the hard drive clings onto the motherboard. You can't remove the motherboard if the hard drive is plugged in, obviously. So, and I think did I remove the RAM? I believe I removed the RAM. And what you got to do when you remove the RAM is make sure that you take it straight out. You don't wobble it backwards and forwards to the left and the right. You have to take it straight out. Just pull the notches at the same time with both your fingers, and then slide it straight out. So now, as you can see, I'm tackling the palm rest and trying to undo the notches around the palm rest from the base. And so I realize this is one of those laptops where you have to get underneath the keyboard to finish unscrewing the top bezel from the base of the laptop. And so what you have to do, there's these notches which are spring-loaded and hold down the keyboard, and you have to, I'll show you clearly in a second here once my hand was out of the way, but right there, that's what it looks like. And I have to push it, you have to push it in with my flathead screwdriver. That's what I use to push it in, and then you have to pull the keyboard up to get it past the notch, and then you can just raise the keyboard up and out of the laptop. And there's multiple notches that you have to undo. You don't have to remove the keys to get at them. I'm just doing that to show the camera so that you can see clearly where the notches are. So as you can see, I'm sort of getting the rest of the notches around the keyboard. I believe this is also one of those funky laptops that have notches on the sides of the keyboard as well, to keep the notches from to keep the keyboard especially secure, I suppose. And then the keyboard just pivots backward, and it's best to do that so you don't mess it with the ribbon cable too much. As you can see, now I'm showing you the ribbon cable plug. There's these 2 little latches on the side. I'm pointing them out now. Just push them forwards with the flathead, and then the ribbon cable should come right out, should be unsecured, and will just slip right out. And now the keyboard is totally free of the laptop, and you can remove it and place it to the side, where you can just hold it until later. And so now there's going to be these screws and other ribbon cables all around the inside underneath the keyboard. You want to undo the rest of them and make sure all the ribbon cables are undone. You want to make sure that nothing's plugged in, because they will hold it most of the time. If you leave just 1 or 2 plugged in, that's usually what holds the palm rest or top bezel still onto the laptop, keeps you from taking it off. So as you can see now, I'm prying it apart. So I think I'll show you in a second how to pry apart. Well, just to show you how I do it, you want to apply a teeny bit of pressure to get the blade of the flathead in between the seam, and then sort of go up and down with it very slowly while applying pressure at the same time. Not too much. You don't want to ruin the plastic. Of course, it is possible to get it off without ruining the plastic too much. You just got to be patient. And just make sure that you don't yank any other bits of plastic around, and that you make sure everything is unscrewed. It's real easy with these flimsy plastic laptops to leave a screw in or leave something done in, and it won't come out. There was some latches at the back, I think, that I just needed to wiggle it around and it'll get it out. But anyways, yeah, if you leave something screwed in, or if you try and just be forceful with it, it's real easy to tear the threads out that hold the screw in, or tear the whole piece of plastic that has the threads in it, and then really ruin that bit of your laptop, so you want to be careful with that. So now I'm pointing out the BIOS battery, the fan. Those two that I'm pointing out are the CPU and GPU. That's the display cable, and then those are several plugs around the edges of the motherboard. And that cable right there, the white cable to the left, is the Wi-Fi antenna. You'll see me thread that out later. Right now I'm removing the DVD-ROM drive, which is a very easy job. There was one screw securing it, and I already unscrewed it when I unscrewed all the screws from the bottom of the laptop. You don't even have to take it apart to this point to remove the DVD-ROM. You can just remove it while the laptop's together. Right now I'm unplugging all the plugs around the motherboard, the speakers, and the webcam if there is one. And then that's to a USB port PCB that goes to the front right corner of the laptop. I removed that ribbon cable. It comes out much like the ribbon cables we had to undo at the top of the motherboard when we got the keyboard off. And now I believe I was unscrewing the motherboard. I unscrewed all the screws holding the motherboard down, and now there's still something holding it down. I believe it was the Wi-Fi card. So as you can see, I'm taking a quick look at the Wi-Fi card to see if I can get that out, and I'm applying a tiny bit of pressure to the motherboard to see exactly how the Wi-Fi card is being held in and how it's holding down the motherboard. It turns out there was a tiny little ribbon which I had to unscrew. It was secured with a screw, and it secured the Wi-Fi card to the plastic on the laptop, on top of the Wi-Fi card itself being plugged into the motherboard, which kept the motherboard in pretty good. So I thought at first it was the cables, so I'm taking the cables out, of course, threading them outside the motherboard to get them out. And now, as you can see, there's the screw that I was talking about. That's still securing the motherboard to the plastic by securing the Wi-Fi card to the plastic. Now that the Wi-Fi card is unplugged, it's taken out of the motherboard, we should be able to lift the motherboard out. As you can see, I'm organizing the screws there. And now lift the motherboard out very slowly, make sure that there's still nothing attached. Oh, the display cable was still attached, so that was the trouble I was having. See, yeah, you gotta be careful with stuff like that. And lift it very carefully, get the ports out of the plastic. You gotta shimmy it out in a way where it doesn't damage anything, and the power cable is still attached. Now the power cable is very tough to get out on most motherboards because it's thick prongs, very thick prongs, and thick plastic because, well, amperage. And be very careful and sort of just leverage it backwards with your fingers like you're trying to unplug something from the wall, but of course it's going to be really tough, and you don't want to go all brutal on it, because you will ruin something, or you will ruin your own skin like I did. I think I cut myself a little bit when I took that out. Just give it time and give it some pressure, and it will eventually come out. Now I'm pointing out the motherboard by itself. I'm going to go ahead and cast the laptop body aside while we place the motherboard by itself on the table here. And this is you want to make sure you're doing this on a flat surface and a solid surface like this, like a table or a counter. And I'm unscrewing the CPU heatsink. That's the copper for the GPU that I'm unscrewing right now. So I'm unscrewing the heatsink from the motherboard. And you gotta be careful lifting the heatsink. The thermal paste will sort of suction the heatsink onto the motherboard and the dies of the processor and the GPU. So be careful lifting it up. So now I think I'm gonna go ahead and take the fan assembly apart, because that's part of why I took the laptop apart, is to obviously dust out the fan. So there's 3 little tiny screws holding in the fan, and once I take the fan body out, then I'll have just the fan hub and the actual fan blades, which actually is one of those cool fans where you can take the blades off like that, see? And this gives me easier access to clean the blades of the fan. So right now I'm cleaning the surface of the hub, the plastic that goes around the hub, and this is the bottom bit of the fan, and now I'm cleaning out the blades, but there's a lot of dust in the blades, and it's really hard to get it all out. So what I do actually is, because it's just plastic, I can just run it under a stream of water like that, and that'll really clean it off, get all the dirt out, all the dust, and that's perfect. And again, this is it's just plastic, so it won't ruin anything, and you can just place it on the side to dry while you're working on the rest of the laptop. And so now that I've done with the fan, dusting the fan, we're going to take a look at the heatsink. because, okay, I'm dusting off the part of the PCB which the fan goes over, because there's a bit of dust collected there. I want to make sure you get everything. Okay, now I'm wiping off the thermal paste, the old thermal paste, the original thermal paste on the CPU and GPU with a little fibrous cloth. You want to make sure you use something like that, not paper towels, not paper material, because it's gonna buff it out. And those are alcoholic pads, and those will get it really clean. And it's perfect for cleaning off the old thermal paste on a CPU and GPU, and gets all the other material off. And it's great for making sure it's all clean. And I of course, get the old thermal paste off of the copper as well. Now you don't want any of the thermal paste, the old thermal paste, mixing in with the new thermal paste, so you got to make sure you get it completely squeaky clean. There you go, as you can see, very nice and clean. And now, I believe I'm going to show you, yeah, I got to get the flashlight, but I will be showing you the dust collecting. Oh, those are the thermal pads. You have to leave those on there. Don't mess with those. Make sure you do not mess with the thermal pads on the copper, because those cool the memory chips and the chipset. Okay, so here we go. So that the flashlight, I'm showing you the layer of dust that has built up on the fins on the inside, the fins that the air flows through, that the fan pushes the air through to cool the laptop. So I don't have an air compressor can or an air compressor available to me to blow the dust out, so I'm just going to use my mouth, and it works well enough for what I'm doing here. And you got to make sure you blow really hard. Sorry, but anyways, yes. So the dust, as you can see, came pretty loose, and it came out pretty good. If you want to be really thorough about it, you can use a Q-tip, I believe they're called, and get in there really good and get all the dust out. So as you can see, the fan's now, for the most part, dry. I mean, it'll be totally dry by the time we completely reassemble the laptop, and it spins just fine on the hub. And we're going to go ahead and put the fan assembly back into the heatsink and screw it back in there, just like it was. Now there's going to be a bunch of, like, there's probably like fibrous tape or some sort of, yeah, just different types of tape that holds the cables together. You want to make sure that you don't peel off the tape too hard or too vigorously to make sure that the adhesive still stays pretty strong. And then use the same tape before, or if it's completely worn out, then you might want to use some non-conductive tape. Do not use Scotch tape or duct tape, because that's not good for the inside of your laptop. And so as you can see here, I'm putting the tape back. That was over the screws. And now the fan's completely reassembled, and the heatsink's just the way it was. And now I have got my Arctic Silver 5, which is the aftermarket thermal paste that I use, that I have a preference for. It's just really good, and it actually has made a difference in my own personal experience of how well machines perform, so I tend to prefer it strongly for my machines. So I'm rubbing some on the CPU and the GPU. The CPU is the first one that you saw. This is the GPU, the NVIDIA GPU, GT540M, I believe it was. It's not a terribly new GPU, but it deserves thermal paste nonetheless, because it does a lot of hard work, so of course. You want to make sure all your components are appropriately cooled. The chipset there in the top right does not need thermal paste. That has a thermal pad on the copper that it uses to stay cool. And you got to make sure you place it correctly back on the laptop. And then I'll be screwing in the CPU. No, the GPU first. Sorry, the GPU I screw in first. Now what I do is I loosely screw them in first, both screws, to vaguely secure the heatsink to the motherboard. So those are all loosely screwed in, all four of them, and then I tighten them in the order that's etched on the aluminum. You'll see it on the most heatsinks will have the order that you're supposed to tighten them etched in. So now the motherboard's completely reassembled and ready to go in. We're going to go in reverse order, so power cable first, and then pivot it back in exactly how we took it out. And so it has to go, the ports have to go into the plastic on the left side first, and then you sort of just pivot the motherboard downwards towards the DVD-ROM drive, and it just slots right back in. Be very careful that when you're reassembling a laptop that you don't scrunch cables beneath the motherboard as you are placing it back down into the base of the laptop, because it's real easy to do that, and then the cables will be stuck down there, and you have to unscrew the motherboard depending on how far you got reassembling the laptop, and then get the cables again to plug them in. And make sure that all the cables that you can see are plugged in. Make sure that there's no plug left unplugged. And if you see a plug that doesn't have a plug in the first place when you disassemble the laptop, because sometimes that'll be the case. I mean, there'll be a webcam plug where a laptop won't have a webcam option, or there'll be like a 3D, NVIDIA 3D Vision plug where a laptop won't have that. And It's important to note what needs to be plugged in where, and if a plug doesn't have a plug to begin with when you disassemble the laptop, when you reassemble it. So as you can see, I put the DVD-ROM drive back in, and right now I'm putting that ribbon cable that leads to the USB PCB back in. And I believe at this point I have plugged in the speakers and all the other equipment. So now I threaded the Wi-Fi cable back through the antenna cable, and there's a groove in the plastic where the cable runs, and then there's these notches that hover over and hold the cable inwards and direct it to the Wi-Fi card. And just making sure that that's all good and done well. You want to make sure you left the laptop exactly as you left it. And so now I save myself a bit of work by plugging in the Wi-Fi antenna cable before actually seating the Wi-Fi card into the motherboard, which is reasonable enough, and that's me screwing it back into that fiber, the ribbon that extends off the plastic to help secure it. So now I'm just making sure everything else is secure. I don't know what the deal was there. I think that was, that's probably tape that holds down the other Wi-Fi cable. And just doing a final check to make sure the rest of the laptop is shipshape. And at this point, we need to make sure that the laptop is still fully functioning and can power on without any errors in case we forgot anything. So what I like to do at this point is just to get everything put back on to a point where at least we can power on the laptop, and then from there just run the laptop up and see if it works. So of course that is the cable for the power button, so that's me showing you how I plug it back in. I go back and forth between the two latches on the side before they're both all the way in. And just give it a wiggle, the ribbon cable wiggle, to make sure that it's firmly set in there. And all it needs is one RAM stick to boot up, so we're just going to install one for now. And plug it, put it together firmly enough to where it stays together, and you're not carrying the laptop or anywhere or exposing it to the elements yet, so no need for it to be perfect. Just need to power it on for a test real quick, and there we go, and it boots right up. So the motherboard's good, everything's good, no errors, so I didn't forget anything. Didn't forget to plug in the fan, or didn't forget to plug in a stick of RAM. And from this point on, it's pretty much just final assembly, getting the laptop back together exactly the way it was. So I put in the second stick of RAM, putting in the hard drive right now so that it'll boot Windows. Be very careful with the hard drive. It's quite a little bit delicate. I mean, so screwing that back in. I believe at this point the Wi-Fi card has already been seated back in there. And again, remember that the battery has not been attached to the laptop this entire time because, for obvious reasons, you don't want power flowing through the laptop as you're working on it. It's real easy to short two leads on the motherboard or different parts of the motherboard with your screwdriver and then end up shorting your laptop, and that would be pretty much a dead laptop. Another thing to note when you're working on your laptop is that the motherboard is an incredibly delicate piece of equipment. It's completely encased in your laptop for protection. So if you're working on it, there's all these fiddly things on the motherboard like the resistors, diodes, and the capacitors. You don't want to bend any of them, knock any of them off, rip any of them off, or put pressure on them, squeeze them, dent them, anything like that. You don't want to do anything because it's possible that it's critical enough to the motherboard's function where if you put the laptop back together, it will not boot, and you will have a bricked or dead laptop. And motherboard is usually the hardest replacement part inside a laptop to find separately. Most of the time, if your motherboard is dead, you usually end up having to get a completely new laptop. So just be aware that when you're working on your laptop, you want to be very careful working around the motherboard. It's an incredibly delicate piece of equipment. So at this point, there was that little hatch right there that the camera still zoomed on for some reason. I don't know if you were looking at that or if you were curious. I was curious what it was, and it's completely empty. I think what it's for is for a 3G card. So if the laptop has a 3G WAN option for wireless internet on the go without Wi-Fi, then there will be something in there, but there isn't. So yeah, I believe that's what it's for. So now the keyboard hasn't been reinstalled yet, so at this point I think I'm screwing in all the screws that go underneath the keyboard, as well as making sure all the ribbon cables underneath are firmly plugged in, such as the touchpad and the power button. And you want to make sure that when you're screwing your laptop back together, when you're taking your laptop apart in the first place, that all the screws are organized in a manner where you don't confuse any of them. Like, it's real easy to have two screws that look almost exactly the same, but one has slightly smaller threads, like smaller diameter and threads, and you'll only discover this when you put the laptop back together and put it in the wrong hole. And it's a huge hassle to get those kind of screws out, or you might ruin the threads of the screw hole if you screw the wrong screw in, etc., etc. So now I powered on the laptop to make sure it could boot Windows and the touchpad worked, because I've had situations where I plugged the touchpad in, or the touchpad hadn't been plugged in because I forgot, and the touchpad wouldn't work. So I had to reseat the plug, and I had already completely reassembled the laptop, so I have to disassemble it slightly to get at the touchpad plug and then reseat it. So now I've put the keyboard back down after making sure that everything still works, and now it's time for me to pop in the battery because the laptop is pretty much completely assembled. So now putting the SD card placeholder back in, and I'm going to go ahead and do a final inspection, make sure that the laptop looks like it hasn't been taken apart, that it's there's no bulges or any problems with the base, or that there still isn't any notches that hadn't been latched together around the seam from the base and the palm rest. And I'm going to do a final power on to make sure the laptop is a fully functioning and working laptop, which it is. And now, if you have an idea, the laptop has brand new fresh thermal paste in it. It's been dusted and cleaned. It's pretty much as close as you can get with a used laptop to a new laptop in functionality. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it was very informative, and it works great for whatever you plan to do with your laptop, and hope that you found it interesting. And again, if you want to see more videos like this, or if you have any requests or ideas or comments or questions, just please post a comment, and I'll be glad to address it if I find the time, I suppose. Good luck, and happy tinkering, you guys.